Talk is cheap. In a world where everyone is shouting about their plans, their potential, and their promises, true power lies in silence and undeniable results. The most respected people don't announce their moves. They let their success speak for itself. If you're tired of empty promises and ready to build real credibility, this session is your blueprint for silent domination. Let's dive in. Principle 1. The power of silent execution. There's an undeniable magic to working in silence, to nurturing an idea, project, or skill away from the spotlight, until it's ready to stand on its own. History's most impactful innovations and personal transformations often follow this pattern. Quiet cultivation followed by undeniable results. The compulsion to share goals prematurely is deeply human. A craving for external validation that neuroscience reveals can actually trick the brain into feeling it's already accomplished something when it's only been announced. This premature dopamine hit saps the very motivation required to see challenging endeavors through to completion. Those who master the discipline of silent execution understand that secrecy isn't about deception, but about creating the psychological conditions for unpressured development. The mental equivalent of a greenhouse where ideas can grow sturdy before facing external weather. The correlation between secrecy and success isn't coincidental. It's causal. When projects remain unshared, they exist in a protected space where iteration happens freely without the weight of others' expectations. Early-stage ideas are fragile. Exposing them to scrutiny too soon often leads to either premature abandonment or defensive attachment to flawed approaches. Scientific research on social reality confirms that when people receive praise for declaring intentions, their brains partially register the goal as already achieved, reducing subsequent effort. Writers know this phenomenon well. The novel discussed too enthusiastically at dinner parties often never gets written. Entrepreneurs experience it when prematurely launched startups pivot endlessly to please early critics rather than building substantive value. In contrast, silent projects benefit from what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect, the mental tension that drives us to complete unfinished tasks we've kept private. This quiet tension becomes creative fuel rather than performance anxiety. Case studies of under-the-radar winners reveal consistent patterns. J.K. Rowling wrote much of Harry Potter in Edinburgh cafes without fanfare. Elon Musk developed SpaceX's first rockets with minimal media exposure. Athletes often make their most significant skill jumps during off-season solitary training. The common thread isn't just avoiding distraction but preserving the vital incubation period where fundamentals solidify before facing scrutiny. These creators understood that premature exposure invites two dangerous forces: the expectation effect from others that creates performance pressure, and the identity leakage where declaring goals allows the self-image benefits of achievement to be claimed before the work is done. Both forces undermine the intrinsic motivation required for breakthrough work, the kind that comes from wrestling privately with challenges until mastery is earned rather than performing for an audience. Silent execution also provides strategic advantages in competitive environments. In business, stealth mode prevents tipping off competitors until market position is secured. In personal development, private skill building allows for surprising leaps rather than incremental, observed progress. Even in creative fields, maintaining mystery around developing work builds anticipation while protecting the creator from the distorting effects of early feedback. The psychological benefits are equally significant. Working without an audience removes the exhausting performance aspect of creation, allowing for more authentic exploration and risk-taking. Mistakes become learning tools rather than embarrassments when no one's watching. Iterations happen freely without concern for appearing inconsistent. Mastering silent execution requires resisting deeply wired social impulses. The modern world equates visibility with validity, shouting with substance. But those who create lasting impact understand the counterintuitive truth. The less you talk about the work, the more energy remains for doing it. They measure progress in private milestones rather than public declarations. They find motivation in the growing gap between their current reality and their quiet ambitions rather than in temporary applause. And when they finally do reveal what they've built, often only when the results speak unmistakably for themselves. The world perceives it as overnight success rather than recognizing the disciplined silence that made it possible. In an era of constant personal broadcasting, choosing to work in silence may be the ultimate competitive edge, the undisturbed space where ordinary effort compounds into extraordinary achievement. Principle 2. The psychology of mystery. Human perception operates on a fundamental principle. What remains partially unseen often holds more weight than what's fully revealed. This cognitive bias explains why people instinctively respect and value those who maintain an air of quiet capability rather than broadcasting every achievement. The mind assigns greater worth to what it must work slightly to understand. A phenomenon psychologists call the effort justification principle. When someone's full depth isn't immediately visible, others unconsciously fill the gaps with assumptions of greater competence, creating a powerful halo effect. This isn't about being secretive or inauthentic, but about understanding that strategic restraint and self-presentation allows your actions to speak louder than your words. The most respected individuals in any field master this balance, revealing enough to establish credibility while leaving room for others to discover additional layers of capability over time. The curiosity gap represents one of the most potent tools for building a lasting reputation. When people sense there's more to you than what's immediately apparent, they become invested in uncovering it. This principle drives everything from effective storytelling to successful marketing campaigns. The audience stays engaged because they want to solve the puzzle. Applied to personal reputation, maintaining this gap means letting your work product precede your self-promotion, allowing others to connect dots rather than having everything explained. A software developer who quietly releases innovative tools becomes the genius coder through others' recognition rather than self-declaration. A consultant whose clients spontaneously share success stories builds more credibility than one who lists every achievement on their website. This approach leverages what social scientists term the generation effect. People remember and value what they've independently discovered about you far more than what you've told them directly. The key lies in creating just enough visibility to spark interest while leaving sufficient space for others' curiosity to work in your favor. Becoming known as the person who delivers requires a deliberate shift from announcing intentions to demonstrating results. There's an undeniable power in understatement followed by overperformance, what military strategists might call speak softly and carry big results. This pattern establishes a personal brand of reliability that compounds over time. Each instance where you deliver more than what was promised, solve problems others couldn't, or demonstrate unexpected skills creates cognitive dissonance in observers. Their mental model of your capabilities must expand to accommodate the new data. The contrast effect makes these moments particularly memorable, which is why someone who occasionally reveals hidden depths makes a stronger impression than someone whose full range is constantly on display. Professionals who master this art develop what might be called reserve competence, a bank of unadvertised skills and achievements that can be drawn upon strategically when most impactful. The strategic use of mystery operates differently across contexts. In creative fields, it might involve sharing works in progress selectively, rather than broadcasting every iteration. In corporate environments, it could mean allowing your contributions to be discovered by decision makers rather than listed in every meeting. Even in personal development, maintaining some private goals creates space for transformation without the pressure of public expectations. The common thread is understanding that perception follows its own physics. What's withheld thoughtfully often exerts greater gravitational pull than what's readily visible. This approach shouldn't be confused with hiding accomplishments or false modesty. It's about timing revelations for maximum impact and allowing your reputation to build organically through demonstrated capability rather than forced assertion. In an era of personal branding oversaturation, where everyone is shouting to be heard, the disciplined use of mystery becomes a differentiator. When you resist the urge to document every step of your journey, you create room for others to be pleasantly surprised. When you let some achievements speak for themselves, they resonate louder than any announcement could. And when you become known as someone who consistently delivers more than what's promised, you transform from just another competent professional into someone others actively seek out, not because they know everything you can do, but because they suspect there's always more beneath the surface. The psychology of mystery ultimately teaches that influence isn't about visibility, it's about perceived depth, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on constant validation. Principle 3. The 90% rule. There's a pivotal moment in the creative process, that final stretch, when a project is nearly complete, but not yet ready for outside eyes. When most people's resolve crumbles. The urge to share progress, seek validation, or simply relieve the tension of solitary work becomes overwhelming. Yet this exact moment, when you're 90% finished but 100% exposed to the dangers of premature revelation, separates consistent achievers from perpetual starters. The 90% rule isn't about perfectionism. It's about understanding that incomplete work invites incomplete judgments, that partial results often yield misleading feedback, and that the psychological cost of sharing too soon far outweighs the temporary relief of doing so. Those who internalize this principle recognize that the true test of commitment isn't how enthusiastically you discuss your work, but how diligently you protect it until it can stand on its own merits. The danger of partial results lies in their fundamental misrepresentation of your capabilities. An unfinished painting can't convey the artist's full vision. A beta version of software rarely reflects the polished product, and a rough draft of a manuscript fails to capture the writer's intended impact. Yet human nature leads us to judge based on what's presented, not what's possible. Neuroscience reveals that first impressions create mental schemas that are remarkably resistant to change. The brain prefers its initial assessment over contradictory evidence that emerges later. This means the half-baked version of your work doesn't just receive poor feedback. It establishes cognitive frameworks in others' minds that subsequent improvements must work doubly hard to overcome. Professionals who consistently maintain high regard understand this implicitly. They know it's better to be absent from conversation than present with subpar representation. The market rewards finished products, completed arguments, and fully realized solutions far more than it does works in progress, no matter how promising those works might be. Resisting the urge to share prematurely requires battling deep-seated psychological impulses. The modern attention economy has conditioned us to seek dopamine hits from likes, comments, and shares, instant gratification that often undermines long-term achievement. Research on what psychologists call social reality demonstrates that when people receive praise for announcing intentions, their brains partially register the goal as accomplished, reducing the motivation needed for completion. Writers experience this when the novel discussed too enthusiastically at parties never gets written. Entrepreneurs face it when startups pivot endlessly based on early feedback rather than executing their original vision. The solution lies in developing what might be termed creative containment, the ability to sustain motivation internally, rather than relying on external validation. Some practitioners use physical tokens to represent private progress. A jar of marbles moved from one container to another. A checklist kept strictly personal, that provide tangible markers of advancement without public exposure. Others establish non-negotiable completion benchmarks before even considering sharing. Practical implementation of the 90% rule involves creating structural barriers against premature revelation. Many high achievers operate on what's known as the airlock principle. No work leaves their private workspace until it passes through multiple quality checkpoints. Software developers might insist on complete functionality before any demo. Researchers often wait until data is fully analyzed before presenting findings. Musicians frequently perfect entire albums before releasing singles. This disciplined approach prevents the common pitfall of becoming locked into early iterations by public expectation. It also allows for the freedom to make substantial changes without explaining or justifying shifts in direction, a luxury unavailable to those who share too soon. The psychological benefit is equally important. Working without an audience removes the exhausting performance aspect of creation, allowing for more authentic exploration and risk-taking. Mistakes become learning tools rather than embarrassments when no one's watching. Iterations happen freely without concern for appearing inconsistent. The competitive advantage of the 90% rule becomes most apparent in long-term career trajectories. Those who consistently reveal only completed work develop reputations for reliability and quality that compound over time. Each project becomes another data point in their professional narrative, another demonstration of their ability to deliver. In contrast, those who habitually share works in progress often find themselves remembered for what they promised rather than what they achieved. The rule doesn't demand absolute secrecy. Strategic check-ins with trusted mentors or collaborators remain valuable, but it does require distinguishing between seeking genuine improvement input and fishing for validation. When you finally do reveal what you've built, at 100% rather than 90%, the impact is undeniable. Colleagues and audiences encounter not potential, but actualization, not possibility, but proof. In a world where most people can't resist showing their cards too soon, Holding yours close until the decisive moment may be the ultimate strategic edge. Principle 4. Social media sabotage. The moment you share a goal or project idea on social media, something insidious happens in your brain chemistry. That rush of excitement from likes and encouraging comments creates what neuroscientists call a dopamine discrepancy. Your mind receives reward signals for something you haven't actually accomplished yet. This phenomenon explains why so many passionately announced projects never progress beyond the announcement phase. The brain, having already harvested social validation, struggles to find motivation for the less glamorous work required to turn declarations into reality. Studies on goal sharing reveal this counterintuitive truth. People who keep their intentions private are significantly more likely to follow through than those who broadcast them. The very platforms designed to showcase achievement often become the graveyards where potential achievements go to die. The announcement high operates like a psychological sugar rush. Intense but fleeting, leaving behind a motivational crash. When you post about starting a fitness journey or launching a creative project, the flood of positive engagement tricks your brain into feeling it's already made progress. This premature sense of accomplishment stems from what psychologists term social reality, the human tendency to perceive things as more real when they've been socially acknowledged. Your mind partially checks the box simply because others have reacted to your declaration, reducing the internal tension that drives persistence. Writers know this trap well. The more they talk about the book they're writing, the less urgency they feel to actually write it. Entrepreneurs experience it when their startup ideas receive praise at cocktail parties, but never make it to market. The pattern reveals an uncomfortable truth. Validation is not fuel for execution, but often its subtle underminer. Alternative documentation methods provide the benefits of tracking progress without sabotaging motivation. Private journals, spreadsheets, or even locked digital folders allow for honest self-assessment without the dopamine pitfalls of public sharing. Some find value in creating progress artifacts, physical representations like checklists or milestone markers that provide tangible satisfaction without social validation. Others use accountability partners rather than broad audiences. Select individuals who provide targeted feedback rather than general praise. The key distinction lies in maintaining what psychologists call task tension, that productive discomfort between where you are and where you want to be that propels consistent effort. When documenting privately, you preserve this crucial motivational driver rather than dissipating it through premature celebration. The most effective creators and innovators often employ what might be called reverse social media practices. They document extensively but share selectively. They maintain private repositories of ideas, drafts, and prototypes, releasing only what meets their standards for completion. This approach maintains the psychological benefits of tracking progress while avoiding the traps of performative productivity. The satisfaction comes from personal achievement rather than public acknowledgement, creating a more sustainable motivation system. In an era where sharing has become reflexive, the discipline of private execution may be the ultimate competitive advantage, not just in what you ultimately produce, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your motivation comes from within rather than from the fleeting approval of others. Principle 5. The art of under-promising. In a world obsessed with hype and exaggeration, the most impactful people understand a counterintuitive truth. Dialing down expectations doesn't limit your potential. It creates space for excellence to shine brighter. This subtle art form transforms ordinary achievements into memorable experiences, not through manipulation but through psychological craftsmanship. When you consistently deliver more than what was promised, you trigger what behavioral economists call the positive expectation violation, a potent cognitive event where reality exceeds mental projections, creating disproportionate satisfaction. The corporate leader who forecasts modest quarterly results, only to surpass them, generates more investor confidence than the perennial overpromiser. The creative professional who submits work before deadlines with unexpected polish builds more trust than the chronic overclaimer. Underpromising isn't about sandbagging or false modesty. It's about understanding that human perception measures success not against absolute standards, but against anticipated benchmarks. Mastering the positioning of surprises requires finesse in communication and timing. The magic happens in the gap between baseline expectation and delivered reality, a gap that must feel organic rather than calculated. Seasoned professionals achieve this through what might be called effortless enhancement, small but thoughtful additions that appear as natural extensions rather than forced extras. A consultant might frame additional analysis as some preliminary thoughts I jotted down, rather than a painstakingly researched bonus. A software developer could position unexpected features as logical extensions of the core product. This framing prevents the perception of inconsistency between initial promises and final delivery, making the extra value feel inevitable rather than erratic. The psychological effect is profound. When surprises appear effortless, they suggest deep competence rather than temporary overexertion. People begin associating you with a quiet mastery that consistently yields more than expected, a reputation far more valuable than any single achievement. The humility embedded in under-promising operates as a silent amplifier of results. By resisting the urge to inflate projections, you create conditions where your work speaks louder than your words ever could. This approach carries none of the strategic limitations of false modesty. It's not about downplaying capability, but about allowing demonstrated outcomes to define your standard. The subtle power lies in the contrast effect. When others habitually overpromise and underdeliver, your inverse pattern becomes increasingly conspicuous. Over time, this consistency builds what psychologists term expectancy bias, the tendency for people to interpret ambiguous information in ways that align with established patterns. Your restrained promises become read, not as limitations but as signals of confidence, creating a virtuous cycle where less hype generates more impact. Practical implementation of this principle requires resisting several cultural currents. The pressure to sell yourself often pushes people toward grandiose projections. The fear of being overlooked tempts premature declarations of capability, but those who cultivate patience with the under-promising approach discover its compound benefits: reduced stress from unrealistic commitments, increased flexibility to accommodate unforeseen challenges, and the priceless advantage of consistently exceeding expectations. In negotiations, it creates a bargaining room. In creative work, it allows for organic development. In leadership, it builds trust through reliability rather than charisma. The deepest wisdom of under-promising reveals itself in its emotional economy. By managing others' expectations thoughtfully, you conserve the energy that would otherwise be spent managing disappointment or defending unmet promises. This conserved energy then fuels the quality of your actual work, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of calm excellence. In an era where everyone's shouting to be heard above the noise, the quiet confidence of under-promising and over-delivering becomes its own kind of eloquence, a language that doesn't announce competence but proves it, doesn't demand trust but earns it, and doesn't chase recognition but attracts it naturally. The most respected figures in any field understand that lasting influence comes not from the height of your promises, but from the depth of your deliveries, and that sometimes the most powerful way to stand out is to deliberately stand slightly under. Principle 6. Body language of the silent winner. True confidence doesn't announce itself. It radiates through subtle physiological signals that others unconsciously decode. The silent winner understands that posture, gesture, and gaze communicate more powerfully than any boastful claim ever could. This nonverbal vocabulary operates beneath conscious awareness, transmitting messages of capability and composure through what anthropologists call honest signals, physical manifestations that are difficult to fake consistently. A slight straightening of the spine when entering a room, the deliberate pacing of movements, the relaxed steadiness of hands, these micro-behaviors form a silent language that others instinctively trust more than words. Unlike verbal declarations that can be empty, the body rarely lies about someone's authentic state. Those who master this physical lexicon gain a distinct advantage. They command respect without demanding it, project assurance without arrogance, and demonstrate competence without self-promotion. The posture of "I'll show you" differs markedly from the theatrics of "look at me." It's grounded rather than performative, an embodied patience that conveys certainty through stillness rather than agitation. Silent winners typically exhibit what movement specialists identify as rooted ease. Feet planted with quiet stability, shoulders relaxed but not slouched, head balanced rather than jutting forward. This posture communicates neither aggression nor submission but centered readiness. Their gestures follow an economy of motion principle. Each movement serves a purpose, avoiding the fidgets and flourishes that betray insecurity. Even their breathing patterns send signals. The silent winner's diaphragm moves steadily where the anxious person's breath climbs high in the chest. These physical qualities don't just project confidence, they actually generate it through what psychologists term embodied cognition, the phenomenon whereby physical states influence mental states. Adopting these postures doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you perform. Nonverbal communication of success relies on mastering several subtle but powerful channels. Eye behavior proves particularly telling. The silent winner maintains comfortable, steady gaze patterns that neither dart away nervously nor stare aggressively. Their blink rate remains measured even under pressure, unlike the rapid fluttering that often accompanies stress. Hand movements follow similar principles of control. Gestures are purposeful rather than reflexive, with fingers typically relaxed rather than clenched or fidgeting. Perhaps most distinctive is what behavioral analysts call temporal control, the silent winner's mastery of pace. They move with considered deliberation, whether shaking hands, turning pages, or entering spaces. This measured tempo suggests cognitive surplus, the sense that they aren't racing to keep up but moving at a speed they've chosen. Even their smiles follow different timing, emerging slightly slower but lasting genuinely longer than the quick, nervous grins of those seeking approval. The clothing choices of silent winners reinforce this nonverbal narrative through what sociologists term aesthetic consistency. Their style remains recognizably theirs across contexts, avoiding both flashy trend chasing and sloppy indifference. Fabric choices tend toward textures that drape well and move quietly, avoiding stiff rustling or distracting shine. Color palettes typically favor depth over brightness, conveying substance rather than attention-seeking. These sartorial decisions aren't about limiting expression, but about ensuring clothing supports rather than competes with the person wearing it. The overall effect creates what psychologists call the halo of coherence. When some aspects of a person are consistently understated and polished, observers assume this quality extends to unseen dimensions as well. Developing this body language requires moving beyond imitation to integration. It's not about copying gestures but cultivating the inner state that makes those gestures authentic. Many silent winners employ private rituals, brief centering exercises before important interactions, subtle physical reminders, like a thumb lightly pressing a forefinger to maintain presence, or deliberate breathing patterns to regulate energy. Over time, these practiced behaviors become second nature, forming what athletes call muscle memory, the body knowing what to do without conscious direction. The transformation follows a gradual arc, from self-conscious adjustment to unconscious competence, from thinking about movements to simply moving with inherent confidence. In professional environments where everyone's talking, the silent winner's body language becomes their most powerful communication tool. Their physical presence in meetings conveys engagement without performative nodding. Their listening posture, leaning slightly forward, hands resting calmly, communicates respect more eloquently than interjections. Even their walk differs, a gait that's neither hurried nor sluggish but purposeful. These nonverbal patterns create a memorable impression that lingers when words fade, building a reputation through thousands of unconscious impressions rather than occasional dramatic moments. In the economy of attention, the silent winner understands that the body speaks volumes even when the mouth stays wisely quiet, and that sometimes the most compelling statement is the one you never have to say aloud. Principle 7. The compound effect of silence. Credibility accrues in quiet increments. Each delivered result, each met expectation, each unspoken standard met, building what becomes an unshakable reputation over time. The silent performer understands this compounding principle, that consistent action without fanfare creates a different quality of respect than trumpeted achievements. Where the chronic self-promoter must constantly reaffirm their value, the quietly competent individual lets their track record speak in their absence. This dynamic operates on what social scientists term the expectation violation theory. When someone consistently delivers more than their visible effort suggests, observers fill the gap with assumptions of greater capability. The math is counterintuitive but powerful. Subtract unnecessary declarations, and what remains multiplies in perceived value. Those who master this equation discover that silence isn't the absence of communication, but a strategic medium that amplifies impact. Human attention operates on contrast. We notice what stands out against background patterns. In environments saturated with self-promotion, the person who says less paradoxically draws more focused attention when they do speak or act. This phenomenon explains why the reserved expert's occasional contributions carry more weight than the constant commentator's stream of opinions. Neuroscientific research on what's called the signal detection theory shows that our brains assign greater importance to rare but meaningful signals than to frequent noise. The disciplined practitioner of strategic silence leverages this bias. Their fewer words gain density, their restrained gestures convey intention, their selective participation commands focus. Over time, this cultivated presence creates what psychologists term an availability heuristic. Because someone isn't constantly inserting themselves into conversations, others assume their contributions must be particularly valuable when they do emerge. The silent performer doesn't fight for attention. They make attention come to them. The myth of the overnight success obscures the quiet years of unrewarded effort that preceded it. Behind every sudden breakthrough lies what physicists might call a critical mass of uncelebrated work. The point where accumulated competence finally becomes visible to casual observers. The silent performer embraces this latency period, understanding that while public recognition follows a sporadic rhythm, personal growth requires steady frequency. They derive motivation from private mastery rather than public validation, measuring progress against internal benchmarks rather than external applause. This approach builds what cognitive scientists call deep fluency, a level of skill integration that appears effortless precisely because it's so thoroughly internalized. When the breakthrough moment arrives, it seems sudden only to outsiders. The performer knows it as the logical outcome of persistent, focused effort. Their overnight success contains countless unphotographed hours, the early mornings when no one cheered, the failures no one witnessed, the incremental improvements no one tracked. The compound effect of silence manifests most powerfully in what might be called reputational capital, the stored goodwill and assumed competence that precedes the silent performer into rooms they haven't entered yet. Unlike social media metrics or self-proclaimed expertise, this capital resists inflation and devaluation because it's backed by substantive achievement rather than perception management. It grows through what economists term network effects. The silent performer's reputation spreads through third-party accounts rather than self-promotion, making it both more credible and more durable. Colleagues become ambassadors, clients turn into advocates, and quality work functions as its own marketing. This organic growth model may lack the immediate rush of viral attention, but it builds something more valuable, lasting influence that doesn't require constant maintenance. In professional ecosystems where everyone's vying for visibility, strategic silence becomes a competitive edge. The silent performer avoids the exhaustion of perpetual self-presentation, conserving energy for substantive work. They escape the trap of becoming what they claim rather than what they create. And they discover the paradox at the heart of meaningful achievement, that the less you announce your value, the more others will do it for you, not because you've manipulated perception, but because you've given them authentic discoveries to share. The compound effect of silence ultimately proves that the most powerful narratives aren't told. They're demonstrated through consistent action and allowed to unfold in others' minds. When you become what others eventually feel they've discovered rather than what they've been told, you transform from another voice in the crowd to someone who occupies a category of their own. Principle 8. Handling doubters correctly. Doubters operate as unwitting allies, their skepticism providing the friction that polishes your resolve to a sharper edge. History's most significant innovations faced initial ridicule. Every breakthrough idea was first dismissed by someone invested in the status quo. The silent achiever understands this pattern instinctively, recognizing critics not as obstacles but as essential components of the proving process. When others question your methods or dismiss your ambitions, they're offering you a gift, the opportunity to refine your thinking, strengthen your commitment, and ultimately deliver work that silences them through sheer quality. This perspective transforms detractors from emotional drains into strategic assets. Their resistance becomes resistance training for your perseverance. The key lies not in convincing them prematurely, but in allowing their doubt to fuel your determination while you focus on execution. A single response serves nearly all critical encounters. We'll see. This disarmingly simple phrase carries profound strategic weight. It neither engages in defensive justification nor concedes to the critic's perspective. It creates psychological space between their skepticism and your certainty, preventing energy-draining debates while maintaining unwavering self-belief. The power of this approach lies in its neutrality. It's not confrontational, but it's also not compliant. High achievers across fields use variations of this technique. Scientists facing peer review, entrepreneurs navigating investor skepticism, artists confronting conventional tastes. We'll see becomes a mental fortress, protecting your focus from distraction while the work continues uninterrupted. This restraint often frustrates critics seeking engagement, but it serves a deeper purpose. It reserves your energy for creation rather than argument, understanding that the most satisfying rebuttal is eventual success. Letting time arbitrate disputes requires patience, but yields undeniable results. The silent performer understands that premature explanations rarely persuade entrenched opinions. Only demonstrated outcomes can do that. This approach aligns with what psychologists term the availability cascade, the phenomenon whereby ideas gain credibility simply through repeated exposure over time. When your work gradually proves itself, critics face a choice: either persist in outdated skepticism and risk appearing foolish, or quietly adjust their stance to align with emerging reality. Neither requires your intervention. The history of innovation shows this pattern consistently. Early opponents often become later adopters, conveniently forgetting their initial resistance. The key is allowing this transition to occur organically, rather than forcing it through confrontation. Your restraint makes their eventual acceptance more likely. Human nature resists coerced admission but willingly embraces what feels like independent realization. The psychological advantage of this approach lies in its emotional economy. By refusing to engage every critic, you conserve mental resources for meaningful work. Each unchallenged doubt becomes another deposit in your focus bank, compounding over time into substantial creative capital. This discipline also trains an invaluable skill: deriving motivation from internal standards rather than external validation. When applause doesn't fuel you, its absence can't starve you. The silent performer reaches a state where criticism and praise alike inform but don't control, taking useful feedback without surrendering to either flattery or discouragement. Practical application of these principles requires developing what might be called selective hearing, the ability to extract potential value from criticism while filtering out pure negativity. The doubter who says that will never work might inadvertently highlight a genuine obstacle worth addressing. The skeptic who asks, "How will you handle X?" could unknowingly prompt useful contingency planning. Even baseless criticism serves a purpose. It tests your emotional resilience and clarifies your commitment. The silent performer listens just enough to learn, then returns to work just long enough to improve. In professional environments where opinions are plentiful but follow-through is rare, your quiet consistency becomes its own statement. Colleagues initially puzzled by your restrained responses gradually understand their pattern. You don't argue possibilities, you demonstrate outcomes. Over time, this approach reshapes how others interact with you. They bring fewer frivolous criticisms and more substantive engagement. Knowing theatrics won't draw you in, but genuine inquiry might. Your reputation evolves from someone who talks about work to someone whose work speaks for itself. A transformation more powerful than any argument could ever achieve. The ultimate handling of doubters isn't in silencing them, but in rendering their opinions irrelevant through undeniable achievement. Not because you needed to prove them wrong, but because you were too busy proving yourself right. Principle 9. The celebration balance. Sharing achievements without crossing into self-congratulation requires the precision of a master chef. Just enough seasoning to enhance, never to overwhelm. The most respected professionals understand this delicate equilibrium. Their accomplishments enter the conversation only when context demands, presented as natural progressions rather than dramatic revelations. This approach transforms what could be perceived as boasting into what's recognized as informative sharing. The distinction lies not in the achievement itself, but in the framing. The difference between "I landed a huge client" and "our team's new approach resonated with client name." One centers the speaker, the other centers the work. When victories are presented as data points in an ongoing narrative of growth rather than as isolated acts of brilliance, they avoid triggering the defensive skepticism that often greets overt self-promotion. The tasteful reveal follows a specific architecture designed to let results speak for themselves. It begins with what communications experts call evidence-based sharing, leading with concrete outcomes rather than personal claims. A graphic designer might showcase a project's increased conversion rates before mentioning their role. A consultant could present a client's growth metrics before explaining their contribution. This structure allows the audience to reach their own positive conclusions before the creator's involvement is even mentioned. The second component is what psychologists term third-party validation, allowing others to connect the dots whenever possible. When colleagues reference your work in meetings or clients offer unsolicited testimonials, the impact multiplies because the praise isn't self-generated. The final element is contextual relevance. Sharing wins only when they provide genuine value to the conversation rather than as standalone announcements. This disciplined approach ensures your competence becomes common knowledge without you being the constant source of its proclamation. Making results undeniable requires a shift from subjective claims to objective demonstrations. The silent performer doesn't say they're innovative. They share case studies that reveal innovation. They don't claim expertise. They demonstrate it through insightful commentary on industry developments. This evidentiary approach taps into what behavioral scientists call the generation effect. People believe and remember what they've deduced far more than what they've been told. When your work is presented in a way that allows others to discover your competence rather than being informed of it, it carries greater weight and sticks in memory longer. The presentation matters as much as the content. A simple portfolio website with clear metrics often convinces more than elaborate self-descriptions. A concise project summary with verifiable results builds more credibility than inflated claims. The celebration balance ultimately serves a strategic purpose beyond mere etiquette. When achievements are shared sparingly but substantively, each one carries greater impact. The professional who occasionally reveals significant milestones develops an aura of quiet potential, the sense that there's always more beneath the surface. This measured approach also provides flexibility. You maintain the ability to surprise people with your range rather than having already claimed every possible capability. In an attention economy where most are shouting their accomplishments, the disciplined reveal stands out precisely because of its restraint. Your reputation grows not through frequency of proclamation but through consistent quality that speaks when you don't, and resonates all the more powerfully on those rare occasions when you choose to let it speak through you. Principle 10. Becoming a person of proof. The shift from talking about potential to demonstrating results marks the defining transition in any professional journey. This metamorphosis doesn't happen through louder declarations, but through quieter dedication, the kind that prioritizes execution over explanation. Those who complete this transformation discover a fundamental truth. Consistent action creates its own momentum, opening doors that persuasion alone cannot. The person of proof operates differently from the outset. They measure progress in deliverables rather than declarations, in client outcomes rather than self-assessments, in tangible improvements rather than aspirational claims. This orientation changes everything. Where others seek attention, they build evidence. Where others chase validation, they accumulate verification. The quality of their work becomes their spokesperson, and their reputation spreads through third-party accounts rather than self-generated noise. A self-writing resume isn't a document, but a trail of demonstrable impact that precedes you into rooms. It manifests when clients mention your contributions unsolicited, when colleagues reference your work in decision-making meetings, when your solutions become the unspoken standard others emulate. This organic credibility develops through what sociologists term the diffusion of innovations. Your proven methods spread through professional networks by merit rather than marketing. The person of proof understands that lasting influence comes not from claiming expertise, but from creating reference points of success that others can't ignore. A software developer's elegant code architecture becomes their resume when other engineers adopt its patterns. A consultant's transformative client results become their resume when executives request similar approaches. A researcher's widely cited papers become their resume without a single boastful claim. These proof points share a common characteristic. They're independently verifiable rather than personally asserted, making them resistant to skepticism and more likely to spread through professional ecosystems. Silent opportunity attraction follows a counterintuitive physics. The less you chase, the more you draw. When your energy flows primarily into creating rather than promoting, three powerful dynamics emerge. First, you develop what economists call asymmetric information advantage. Your deep work gives you insights and capabilities that aren't yet common knowledge, positioning you to recognize and seize opportunities others miss. Second, your growing body of work creates what network theorists term preferential attachment, the phenomenon where visible success attracts more success, like a snowball gathering mass. Third, you avoid the professional stagnation that comes from premature scaling, that common trap where people expand their self-marketing before sufficiently developing their substantive value. The person of proof reverses this sequence, building undeniable substance first and letting visibility follow organically. Practical implementation of this approach requires resisting several cultural currents. The pressure to build your personal brand often pushes professionals toward visibility before readiness. The fear of being overlooked tempts premature disclosure of half-formed ideas. But those who cultivate patience with the proof-first approach discover its hidden benefits. Opportunities come pre-vetted because they're based on demonstrated capability rather than perceived potential. Negotiations start from positions of strength because your track record establishes baseline value. Professional relationships form around substantive respect rather than superficial networking. The deepest advantage of becoming a person of proof lies in its sustainability. Talk-based reputations require constant maintenance, each claim demanding another, louder claim to stay relevant. Proof-based reputations compound over time, with each achievement reinforcing all previous ones. The professional who quietly delivers exceptional work eventually reaches a tipping point, where their mere involvement becomes a signal of quality, where their opinion carries weight not because they declared it should, but because their history justifies it. In an era of endless self-promotion, choosing to let your work speak for itself may be the ultimate differentiator, not just in how you're perceived, but in what you become capable of achieving when all your energy flows into creation rather than convincing. The person of proof doesn't need to announce their transformation from talker to doer. The difference announces itself every time they deliver, and then delivers for them when opportunity comes calling. In an era of empty noise, your silent execution becomes your loudest statement. By mastering these principles, you'll transform from someone who talks about success to someone who demonstrates it effortlessly. Remember, every minute spent explaining what you'll do is a minute stolen from actually doing it. Start today by taking one project dark, resisting the urge to announce, and letting the quality of your work speak volumes. The world is waiting to be impressed, not by your words, but by what you can prove. Will you keep telling, or will you start showing?